Today it's time to talk about my top 10 best books of 2025. This is a video that I always look forward to filming, or I should say I look forward to putting together the list because I enjoy reflecting on how my year has gone. The actual filming process, for some reason around this time of year, I always end up getting a cough or a cold. So I am recovering from an illness. Hopefully my voice can hold out for the duration of filming, but if I do sound a little bit croaky at times, then that is why. But I'm not going to let it ruin my enthusiasm. I am so excited to talk about these books today. I will say, even though my 2025 reading went all right, I think I read exactly 100 books, and of those books, over 20 of them were 5 stars. So pretty great year. I don't think it was quite as good as 2024, so I will leave my best books of 2024 linked in the description just in case you missed that, if you would like to check it out. But this video is about 2025, and we're going to go in order of when I read each of these books, just because it was the easiest when I was going through my reading spreadsheet and it makes sense in my brain. There's also a mix of different genres as well because I read a lot of different genres. I talked about this a little bit in my 2026 reading goals video. I had a lot of luck with sci-fi and speculative stuff this year. There's also some fantasy on this list. We've got some romance, which I wasn't expecting because I didn't think I'd read many romance books that I enjoyed this year, but I found 1 or 2. And then we've got some thriller, horror adjacent stuff. Kicking us off, we have Annie Bot by Sierra Grier, which I read back in January. I have such a vivid memory of lying on the beach in Spain, listening to this audiobook and being completely absorbed in the story. If you don't know, this is a character study. It's following a main character called Annie, who is a cuddle bunny robot. She was created to be a girlfriend for her owner Doug. At the start of the book, he switches on this mode called autodidactic mode, which means that she is able to develop her own personality, and the idea is that she can learn to become more human. Doug claims that this is what he wants. Doug is not a nice person, and the author deliberately makes you feel uncomfortable throughout the book. It does touch on what it means to be human because Annie is grappling with all of these emotions that she doesn't understand. One of the main themes though is it's a book about misogyny, and it does feel quite distressing in places, seeing Annie in this abusive relationship, but she doesn't have the knowledge or the experience to put words to what she's feeling, and like I said, is very deeply uncomfortable. I think that if I'd read it physically, I probably still would have enjoyed it, to be fair, but there was something about listening to the audiobook and hearing the main character's voice. It gave me goosebumps. Writing isn't super complicated, so I would label this as accessible literary fiction. I still found it very thought-provoking though, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I read it nearly 12 months ago. This next book, I think it makes sense to talk about out of order because even though I read it over the summer, I think it does relate to Annie Bot in a way. I think regardless of how you felt about Annie Bot, if those themes interest you, then I would recommend The New Age of Sexism by Laura Bates. This is non-fiction, and it's one of the, in fact it is the only non-fiction book that I read this year that wasn't a memoir or a biography. I found it really eye-opening, however it did also make me feel very angry and frustrated. I think you can feel how much passion the author has for this topic, and that's something that I really appreciated. It talks a lot about various topics. The purpose of the book is to show how emerging technologies are disproportionately affecting women and people of colour in a negative way. It talks about deepfakes and how some people have this opinion that if something isn't real, then the harm can't be real. But Laura Bates interviews multiple people who have been affected by deepfakes, how it's impacted them, and it's very clear that this is a topic that should be taken seriously. Laura Bates has also done a lot of campaign work. She's gone into schools and talked to young people who maybe don't realise or appreciate the long-term impact of their actions. There's a section that talks about virtual girlfriends and how the creators of these apps claim that they're completely harmless. However, the marketing suggests otherwise because they're marketing these apps saying, oh, get yourself a girlfriend who won't nag you and who won't talk back. There's a chapter towards the end that talks about a company in London who used AI to automate their recruitment process, and they had to roll it back because the AI was trained using a database that has existing biases. This company wasn't exactly diverse to begin with, and they found that women and people of colour were being disqualified. That That I think really stood out to me because there are biases that exist in our real world, and there's an opportunity with AI to acknowledge those biases and fight against it. But maybe that's not happening right now. So yeah, I would really recommend this. I thought it was very well researched. You can really feel the passion that Laura Bates has for this topic. Like I said, it did make me feel angry and frustrated and also quite anxious at parts. So make sure you're in the right headspace if you are interested in picking this one up. Next up, we have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is the first book in the Wayfarer series, and I have actually read books 2 and 3 in this series since reading this first book. I've decided to hold up this first book because it's the only one that I own physically. The other 2 I read on my Kindle. When I read this, I gave it 5 stars. I then read books 2 and 3 and they were even stronger 5 stars. So just take this as a recommendation for this series as a whole. These are interconnected standalones, so this wraps up as a complete story, and then you have book 2, which follows other characters but still set within the same universe, which is our universe but way in the future. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years into the future, humans have left the Earth, gone out into the galaxy, and they have now become part of the galaxy. And this is really a book about communication and the importance of respecting other people's cultures. This first book follows the crew of a ship called the Wayfarer, and there are multiple different species that are part of the crew of this ship. One of the main characters that you follow is called Rosemary. She is new to the ship, she's just joined, and it's about her experience of learning about all of these different aliens that she'd not necessarily met before. Maybe she's heard of them and studied them, but she's actually seeing in practice how they differ from humans, and it's just so interesting. This is cozy fantasy, so there's very little plot. It is very much about the character relationships. There are some fantastic moments where characters are trying to be sensitive to the needs of others, and it made me tear up a little bit. I just loved that warm, cozy feeling that I got from it, but there's still stakes, I think, throughout the series. It's not just happy all the time. There are real issues that these characters are having to deal with, and I just loved it. I loved it so much, and I really need to read the 4th and final book in 2026. Next up, we have Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which has become my second favourite book by this author. I don't think anything is ever going to top Evelyn Hugo, because that was the first Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I read, and it's an all-time favourite, but Atmosphere is a close second. No book made me cry as much as this book did in 2025. If you don't know, this is set in the 1980s, and it follows Joan, who is one of the first women accepted onto NASA's space shuttle program. The book actually opens with a space mission that goes wrong. There's some kind of disaster, and you see bits of that throughout the book. However, the main timeline is set in the early 80s, where Joan is first joining this program. How she and the other women on this program feel a lot of pressure. They feel like they're under a microscope. People are watching them and seeing them as representing all women. They're paving the way for future generations, and if they mess up, people are going to turn around and say, see, this is why you shouldn't let women into space. That pressure really motivates them, and I just loved the characters in this. It's not just a book about space, it's also a love story, and I thought the love story in this was so beautifully written. Joan also has a very complicated relationship with her sister, who doesn't understand her. She maintains a relationship with her for the sake of her niece, but there's a lot of complex relationships in this, and I think Taylor Jenkins Reid does that so well. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab is the next book on my list. I read this the week it came out, and I'm so glad that I did, because this isn't a very plot-forward book. There is a plot, but it's not really important, and it's not the purpose of the book. So I think the less you know, the more enjoyable you might find it. I know that I really enjoyed discovering certain elements for myself, so I'm not going to go too much into the plot. All I knew about it was the tagline, which is toxic lesbian vampires, and I do think it delivers on that. I think some people hearing the word toxic might think that it's going to be upbeat and fun, and that's not the vibe. This is much more slow and atmospheric. There are 2 main perspectives that you're following initially. century, one in 2019 and one in the 1500s, and I really enjoyed all of the perspectives in this. I found them equally as interesting, especially the past timeline where you're seeing how women were only seen as wives and mothers, how characters are wanting to deviate from that, and maybe vampirism is going to give them that opportunity. It's not a unique take on vampires, but I felt like a lot of care went into this story. You know, where you can just feel that an author has poured their heart and soul into a book? That is how I felt about Bury Our Bones, and that's why it's one of my favourite books of the year. The writing was beautiful and poetic, and I actually read this physically while listening to the audiobook, which is a full cast and 10 out of 10 would recommend. Next up we have A Witch's Guide to Magical Inkeeping by Sangu Mandana. This I would describe as a cosy fantasy romance, or a cosy fantasy with romance, because the romance wasn't necessarily why I loved the book. However, it is significant enough where if you don't want any romance, then you're probably not going to enjoy this. It follows a main character who once had the potential to become one of the most powerful witches in Britain. However, when she was a teenager, she performed a spell that ended up zapping most of her powers. She's now around 30 and she still has a small spark, but she doesn't have anywhere near the power that she used to, and she runs this in Lancashire with her aunt. They have a whole host of different characters that stay there, and an opportunity comes up where she may be able to regain her powers to their full potential. The guy who can help her just so happens to be a very attractive historian, and yeah, this is marketed as romantasy. I don't know how I feel about that, because I did think that the romance went from about 30 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour, and it was a little bit jarring. I still thought the romance was cute, it was fine, but what I loved about this was the found family. A host of characters that live at this inn, how they in the past have been made to feel unwelcome, and so they go out of their way to make other people feel included, and it was just so heartwarming. If you're looking for a very wholesome read, then I would recommend it. I would also recommend this author's other book, which I think was one of my best books of the year before last, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. That is in no way related to this book, by the way. I think there was some confusion. They are both witchy books set in the UK, but different worlds, different backstories to the witchiness. So just wanted to put that out there if you are curious about picking this one up. Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez was my 5-star romance of the year. I am so glad that I finally picked it up, because it reminded me that I can actually enjoy romance. I talked about this recently in my goals video. A lot of recent romance releases haven't been appealing to me because I don't get excited about a book when I hear it marketed based purely on its tropes. I don't mind tropes, but it's not a reason for me to pick up a book. I want to know what the plot is. I want to know that there's something about a character dynamic that is going to be unique or interesting, and I think Part of Your World did deliver on that. I loved that it focused more on the emotions that the characters were feeling. The book actually opens with this couple having a one-night stand, but you don't see it on page. Instead, you see how they feel about it afterwards, how they both want to see the other person again, but they come from completely different worlds, and the whole book is about them navigating this situation. The female main character, Alexis, is a doctor with a very complicated family. Her parents are very controlling and want her to continue the family legacy by climbing the career ladder, and maybe that isn't necessarily what she wants. Daniel, the love interest, is a sweetheart. He gives golden retriever energy. He adores her sometimes more than I think she deserves. I loved that this had a small town setting, and it was just everything that I want from a romance book. It doesn't have that much spice, as I might have said, but I don't think you need a lot of spice in order to build chemistry between characters. I love a spicy romance book every so often, but this is what I want from a romance. Next up we have The Good House by Tanana Reeve-Dew, which I picked up because I loved The Reformatory by Tanana Reeve-Dew, and I wanted to read more by this author. This is quite different. The Reformatory is historical fiction set in the 1950s that has paranormal and real-world horror elements. The Good House was published in the early 2000s, and it's also set around that time. It did have that early noughties feeling, and it felt very nostalgic. There were these natural references to music and pop culture that made me feel very immersed in the setting, and I really appreciated that. It was completely accidental and obviously not done on purpose, but it felt very grounded within that setting. It follows a woman called Angela who inherited a house from her grandmother in rural Washington state in this small town, and one summer she throws a 4th of July party where something very tragic happens to her family. It then picks up 2 years later where Angela is living in California and she gets a phone call from her neighbours who she's been paying to look after this house, and they contact her to say some people are interested in buying it, so we think you kind of need to make a decision because we can't look after this house indefinitely. Angela then travels back to this small town and horrific things start to happen. This is, in my opinion, much more of a paranormal horror in comparison to The Reformatory. It has these magical elements that are based on the voodoo religion, and I thought the way that was integrated was really interesting. There's a lot of nuance and layers to the characters. It is a long book. It's, I think, about 600 pages. I think there was a real benefit to spending that amount of time with the characters because I felt so much more for them. This does have some uncomfortable sexual content, which I wanted to mention in case that's something you would prefer to avoid. I thought the setting of the Pacific Northwest felt very alive, and there were some genuinely creepy moments and eerie scenes, which is what I want from a horror. It has this great tension and atmosphere, which I really appreciated. The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu is a short story collection that I loved this year. I have recommended this to so many people. If you enjoy speculative fiction, even if you don't usually read short stories, I don't usually read short story collections, but 90% of the short stories in this were so good, and so many of them have really stuck with me, and I think that's a real talent when a writer can make that much of an impact in such a short page count. The title story, The Paper Menagerie, I think is only about 20 pages, and it made me cry. It's a story about a boy who is mixed race, and it's about identity. I thought it was beautifully written. There's another story that stood out to me that asked the question, what if your soul was an object that existed outside your body? What would that mean? That I thought had a really interesting and comforting message. One of the most impactful stories though was The Man Who Ended History. That is about a scientist who invents a way to virtually travel back in time and experience historical events. It looks at the atrocities that the Japanese committed against the Chinese during World War II and how history is sometimes covered up for political reasons and the repercussions of this discovery. It was difficult to read, but it was unflinching, and in my opinion it was really powerful. Of course, my camera battery runs out when I only have one more book left to talk about, and this is a book that I haven't yet spoken about on my channel because I only read it in December. I am a little bit concerned that maybe recency bias is coming into it because I did literally finish it a couple of weeks ago, but I loved The Compound by Aisling Rawle. This is marketed as Love Island meets Lord of the Flies, and I do think that's kind of accurate. However, I still want to set expectations because I think some people might hear Love Island, might think reality TV, it's going to be really fun and trashy, and that is not the vibe of this book. It's much more intense, much more dystopian. It follows a main character called Lily who wakes up in this compound. She knows that she's going to be there because she's applied to be on this reality TV show where contestants are competing for prizes. Immediately it made me feel unsettled because Lily is walking around this compound and something feels a bit off, but they're acting like everything is fine. There are pizza boxes in the kitchen. The house seems to be a mess. There's not even a front door, but they're all just like, oh yeah, this is completely to be expected. And you gradually start to paint this picture of a dystopian world that has been ravaged by global warming. There's been wars, and I think that really helps you understand why these characters are so motivated by consumerism. They are so focused on these challenges and winning things, owning things. Lily, by her own admission, doesn't feel like she has much to offer to this community, because you do start to see this group dynamic form. It feels like a survival story where they're having to work together, they're having to allocate different roles. You don't really know who to trust, because as well as these group tasks that they're having to complete to earn food and things like that, they also have individual tasks that they're not allowed to talk about to anyone. So it does have that commentary on reality TV and how producers will manipulate things for the sake of entertainment. I also loved how intense it felt and how we were building and building. And Lord of the Flies, if you don't know, is one of my favourite classics. I've read it over 20 years ago now, so I am due a reread, but anything that gets compared to Lord of the Flies, anything to do with seeing a group try to survive, you know I'm probably going to enjoy it. And the audiobook for this as well was fantastic. If you are looking for an audiobook recommendation specifically, this is one that I would recommend. That does bring me to the end of this list and the end of this video, so thank you for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments some of your favourite books of 2025, especially if any of your favourites were also my favourites. Let me know how many we have in common, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.